Wife feels regret after taking advice to open their marriage. I need advice on how to salvage my marriage. I've been married to my husband for 5 years, and we've been together for 7. To keep things private, I'll call us James and Skylar. We crossed paths in our second year of community college. I earned a 2-year degree in office management, while James pursued a 4-year degree in business administration from a university that offers remote classes at the community college. Now I'm 26, James is 27, and we are planning to start a family later this year. We wanted to have 4 kids, hoping for 2 boys and 2 girls. We enjoyed a happy marriage, and both our families cared for us deeply. Now, here's where I messed up big time. I formed a close bond with a delivery driver from one of the major delivery companies that brings packages to our office. We'll call this man Jaden to keep things private. Jaden, 25 and single, has been making deliveries to my office for almost 2 years. From the moment we met, there was a certain chemistry, not romantic, but an undeniable spark. I felt a connection with him, and we would chat for about 10 minutes whenever he came by to deliver. I was eager to see him and always positioned myself at the front when it was time for his delivery. One day, our chat went deeper than usual. Jaden mentioned he wanted to ask me something personal. He mentioned it was personal and hoped I wouldn't take offense or harm our working relationship. I said, "No way. Feel free to ask me anything." Jaden said to me, "I feel a strong attraction to you and was curious if you felt it as well." His boldness caught me off guard and made me feel a bit embarrassed. After a moment to think, I told him the truth. I said I felt it as well. Jaden said he would have asked me out if I wasn't married. I appreciated the compliment, and that wrapped up our chat. He walked away, and that was it. For the next week, we exchanged short, uncomfortable small talk whenever he came in to drop off packages. I felt worried and guilty that I might have overstepped with him. I couldn't get rid of this feeling. At home, James and I were enjoying life together. I want to be clear. I have always been completely happy with James as a lover, friend, and husband. I believe he would have felt the same about me back then. He was just right for me. I started to imagine how I could have both my loving husband and a deeper connection with Jaden beyond just our work talks. Eventually, I found out that this is sometimes referred to as being a cake eater. I began researching and came across some articles on polyamory and open marriages. I found these ideas to be silly and gross, so I didn't give them much thought back then. I knew my husband wouldn't go for that. Even if he did, it could damage our marriage, and both our families might cut off communication with us. I didn't want that to happen. Weeks passed, and my married life was good, but I couldn't stop thinking about connecting with Jaden. I began looking into the topic again and found a post online called "It Doesn't Hurt to Ask." A woman wrote a blog post about her successful open marriage. She shared her feelings about loving her husband, but also having an interest in a man she met during volunteer work. The blogger mentioned that she was unsure how to bring up the topic with her husband without harming their marriage. After keeping her feelings hidden for more than 2 years, she finally decided to ask him during a long drive one day. She was surprised by how interested he was. They opened their marriage, and now each has partners outside of it, seeing them 3 to 4 times a month. The blogger said they have been doing this for 4 years, and that their marriage is stronger and both are happier than ever. Her story grabbed my attention because it was exactly what I wanted, but I was too afraid to bring it up with my husband. One Sunday morning, we were just hanging out at home, scrolling through our phones and talking. I decided to bring it up and asked him directly. "I just came across a post about open marriages. What do you think about them?" He asked me if I meant couples being with other people. I checked in and asked him once more what he thought about it. He mentioned that he found it disgusting and believed people should just get divorced if they want to sleep around. I mentioned that it's gaining popularity in the US and several Western countries. James looked completely disgusted by the topic, so I quickly switched to something else. After seeing his reaction, I decided not to mention it again. I didn't want to risk our great marriage. A couple of weeks pass, and James and I are cuddling in bed, feeling great after an amazing, intimate moment. I'm lying on his chest, unable to see his face, and suddenly he asks who I was thinking of when I mentioned open marriages last week. I felt a jolt and a sinking feeling in my stomach. I lifted my head and looked at him, asking, "What are you talking about? What are you trying to say?" James mentioned he read research indicating that when a woman brings up an open relationship, it often means she has either cheated or has someone else in mind. His revelation surprised me. It really shook me. James noticed how my reaction changed and said, "I know you too well. It seems like you're keeping something to yourself. Just be truthful." I went quiet, looked away, and said that I had never cheated on him and never would. I could have stopped there, but I chose not to. I admitted that if we thought about an open marriage, there was a coworker I might think about. James asked, "Tell me about this, colleague." I started to share my experiences with Jaden and our conversations up to that point. I mentioned what he had said about his feelings, but I left out that I felt the same way about him. What James said next really scared me. He mentioned that, technically, I had already cheated on him. I got annoyed and said I hadn't done anything wrong, but he replied that my relationship with Jaden was what they call an emotional affair. I had no idea what this concept was, so James broke it down for me. I was really frustrated, and James said we should pause the discussion for now since he needed to sleep for an early start the next day. He dozed off fast, but I stayed awake. I picked up my phone and started looking into emotional affairs, going through many articles and posts on the topic. James was correct. What I had with Jaden was nearly an emotional affair. No, I need to clarify that it was definitely a full-blown emotional affair. I felt terrible, like I had let my husband down. I couldn't sleep, so I got out of bed, went downstairs, and made some tea. I ended up dozing off on the couch at about 4 a.m. At around 6:45 a.m., James woke me with a kiss and told me he was leaving for work. He said it was almost 7 a.m. and I needed to start my day. I kissed him back and said I loved him, but this time I really meant it. I felt guilty about my feelings for Jaden. Days went by, and we were in bed after being intimate when James unexpectedly said he would consider an open marriage if that's what I wanted. This surprised me, so I asked, "Why are you mentioning this now?" He said he had been thinking about our talks and thought we should give it a shot while we were still young, if it was what we wanted. I showed interest, but promised never to risk our marriage or love, since he was the most important person to me. James said that if our love is strong, it can survive infidelity. I argued that a mutual open relationship wouldn't count as cheating since we would both be on board with it. He just said, "Let's consider our marriage open, starting now." I was surprised again and told him to take it easy, saying we needed to set some ground rules. He laid out 3 simple rules. 1. We had to announce who we intended to sleep with and when, ahead of time. 2. We needed to share the details of the encounter afterward, but no graphic descriptions. 3. Protection was mandatory for all intimate moments, no exceptions. I accepted his terms and suggested a few more points. First, we would keep our open marriage private, and second, we would ensure that these outside relationships wouldn't harm our marriage and that we would stay together. James said he couldn't agree to either of these conditions. When I asked why, he just said he didn't agree to those terms and didn't want to talk about it anymore. I was really uncomfortable with this, since it was so unlike James, but I snuggled up to him and we drifted off to sleep. Talking to James made me feel uneasy about the open relationship. It seemed like he had some hidden agenda. For the next month, I didn't go after the open relationship, and we just went about our lives like usual. I kept my distance from Jaden at work, only engaging in brief, simple conversations about the weather and how busy we both were. Things like that are just surface level. One day, Jaden said he missed our talks and asked me what was up. I explained that I was busy with work and home responsibilities, and I just didn't have time to chat recently. I was wondering if I should mention my open marriage to him. I made the decision to do it. I really wish I could go back and change my decision. I thought it wasn't the right place to talk at the office, so I asked him to meet up for work that day, and he said yes. We met at a local bar with an outdoor patio, great for the warm early spring weather. I explained my recently opened marriage and directly asked him if he would be interested in a relationship with me. He agreed without a second thought. He mentioned that he's been waiting for me to show up and hasn't rushed things out of respect. He also said he's been dreaming about me for months. Our conversation at that meetup was mostly flirty. It was a Tuesday, and we planned to meet the next day at his apartment after work for our first date. I made it clear that I had to leave by 6:30 p.m. to get back to my husband, who is my top priority. That night, I got home and made a nice dinner for James. After dinner, I told him about my talk and meeting with Jaden earlier that day. We set a date for the next day after work at his place, as long as James was still okay with our open marriage. James seemed surprised when he said, "Oh, yes, okay, so you're going to meet him tomorrow?" I agreed, but made sure to let him know that we could still cancel it since my main focus was on him and our relationship. He said, "No, let's do this." We hugged, but I felt a stiffness and distance in his embrace, different from how we usually are. I thought this was just nerves. That evening, we kept to ourselves. He was busy with work in his office, and I had my own tasks to finish. When we went to bed, I cuddled with him and tried to get closer, but he said he was too tired and needed to sleep. The next morning, I woke up to find that James was gone. He sent a text saying he had an early meeting he forgot to mention. He said he would meet me that night. This was not typical for him, but I brushed it off and went on with my usual routine of getting dressed and leaving for work. I picked a really cute outfit that day, since Jaden and I were meeting right after work. I texted James all day, but he didn't reply. I was thinking about canceling the date with Jaden again. I want to share my story, and I truly wish I had done it sooner. At 4:17 p.m., I got a text from James. He said he loved me and would meet me that night. I felt relieved and took it as a sign from him to move forward. I'll get right to the point. Jaden and I met, and the experience was enjoyable. It's not as satisfying as it is with James, and there's definitely no love involved. It was very fulfilling, mainly due to the intense desire and the forbidden nature of our actions. I left his place after about an hour and a half and got home just after 6:40 p.m. To my surprise, James was not home yet. I didn't mind this since it allowed me to shower and wash my clothes to get rid of Jaden's cologne scent. I didn't want James to see this. I felt physically satisfied, but a strong sense of guilt, shame, and remorse lingered, leaving me feeling dirty. I was really conflicted and felt anxious. I planned to make a simple yet nice dinner for James and lit some candles for a romantic vibe. I wanted him to understand how much I loved him and that the physical affair with Jaden was meaningless to me. It was purely physical and didn't compare to the love and connection I share with him. I thought we would finish our night by being intimate. I understand some might see this as selfish or even gross, but I want to clarify that I used protection for everything with Jaden, and there was no exchange of bodily fluids at all. At 7:30 p.m., James still wasn't home. I called him, but it went straight to voicemail. I sent him a text saying I was home and waiting for dinner. I got no response from him. It was 8:50 p.m., and I started to feel anxious. I kept trying to reach him through calls, messages, and texts. At about 9:30 p.m., I received a text from him saying not to wait up because he would be home late. I sent a message asking where he was and who he was with, but he didn't reply. I was tired and went to sleep after midnight. I heard the shower running in the spare bathroom, so I got up to check it out. The door was locked, which was unusual for James, so I knocked, but there was no response. About 10 minutes later, James came out with a towel around him and asked, "How was your night?" I said it was okay, but then he asked me directly, "Did you hook up with Jaden?" I told him not to use that term, but then I admitted that Jaden and I had been together. I asked him where he had been. He mentioned he spent the night at a few bars and went dancing. I asked him who he was with because I could smell perfume on his clothes that were left behind. I asked, "Who is this person?" He said that because they didn't sleep together, he didn't have to tell me who she was. I can't share the exact words, but I can mention that he never used that particular word with me. His way of speaking and using that word made me quite anxious. I asked him why he was using the guest bathroom to shower. He said he would be using the guest bedroom and bathroom until I took 2 STD tests. His words hit hard, and I replied, "What?" I made it clear that we had rules, and I ensured Jaden used protection for everything we did. He shot back, "Haven't you heard of oral HPV or oral herpes?" I'm keeping my distance until you're cleared. Think of it as my way of social distancing. I was really upset and crying. I told James that I wanted to end our marriage, which was the last thing I wanted to happen. James replied, "Not a chance. You had your chance, and now it's my turn." Feeling upset, I continued to cry while he said he was going to bed for an early meeting and needed to rest. I cried for hours and then fell asleep on the couch. When I woke up, James was already gone. He texted me, saying not to wait for him. I called him, but he didn't answer. I sent texts and left messages all day, but he didn't reply. I was unwell and felt like I was losing my mind, worried that I had probably ruined my marriage. I didn't see Jaden that day since there were no deliveries. I called him at 4:30 p.m. to see if we could meet that night. He said I sounded upset. I said I was, but we would talk about it when I got to his place. I met him and said I wanted to end things. I realized it was a mistake because I loved my husband and wanted to be with him only. I shared what happened, and he got it. He only requested one more hookup, promising that after that, he would only contact me for work. I went along with it, and we had a quick encounter, just the basic position that lasted under 10 minutes. Later, he said, "That was awful. You just stayed still like a tree trunk." I said sorry, acknowledging that this was a major error and it wasn't his fault. I got ready, hugged him one last time, and walked out. Before I left, Jaden said, "I'll never get women like you." I asked him what he meant by the comment. He just said nothing, no comment, and looked completely disgusted. I left in a hurry, tears streaming down my face the whole way home. How could I have been so foolish? I ruined my marriage, and for what reason? For no reason whatsoever. I felt like the dumbest person ever, and once again, I just felt gross. James got home at 1 a.m. that night. I felt terrible, realizing that I had completely messed up my life. On Friday, James did it again. He left before I woke up and texted me not to wait for him. The distance and coldness felt heavy on my heart. I enjoyed the mornings, evenings, and weekends with my husband, cooking for him, cuddling, taking walks after dinner, and chatting about random things. I lost everything, and I felt terrible about it. I messaged James to say I wanted to talk in the morning. He replied that it was fine, but it had to be first thing since he was leaving for the day. I asked him where he was headed, but he didn't respond. He arrived home at 1:30 a.m. I stayed silent and just lay in bed, tears streaming down my face. He took a shower and went straight to bed. I got up early to wait for James. He walked into the kitchen at 7 a.m. and poured a glass of orange juice. The atmosphere felt very distant and lacking in warmth. He didn't look at me and just sat down at the table, staring at his phone. I got up, walked over, and sat down on his lap. I said, "Look at me." He turned his gaze, but I said, "Look at me," and softly held his face, staring into his brown eyes. I told him I loved him completely and that I made a bad decision, not just a mistake, but a bad decision. I apologized and said I would do whatever it takes to earn back his trust and love. He just stared at me as if I were crazy. I asked him if he loved me, and he just stayed silent. I asked James to respond. He claimed he had no idea. I began to cry and said, "I can fix this." He said, "I don't think you can." I called him a bastard and said he planned all this. "Did you set me up to get divorced?" He claimed he didn't, but when I mentioned the idea of an open marriage, he acknowledged that he realized our marriage was probably finished based on what he had seen. I asked him why he didn't just tell me to cut off all contact with Jaden. He said you can't make someone be faithful. You either are or you aren't, and it's clear you're not a monogamous person. I cried and told him I was upset and asked him not to end things between us. He didn't say a word, just stood up and walked out. I asked him where he was headed, and he replied that he would return after midnight. I reminded him that tomorrow was Easter Sunday, and we were set to leave at 7 a.m. to drive to my parents' house. My family really loves my husband, and we celebrate almost every holiday with them since his parents live in Florida now. He said he wasn't going. I was shocked and devastated. I asked him to please come with me, but he just said no, coldly. I asked him what I should tell my parents, and he said he didn't care. Then he told me to just tell them the truth. I asked him to stay home with me, but he just got ready, grabbed a gym bag, and walked out the door. I feel completely broken and utterly deflated. I need some advice on how to save my marriage. What steps can I take? I'm interested in hearing from anyone who has experienced open marriages and if a couple can bounce back from betrayal. I'm interested in hearing from those who have managed to reconcile after being in an open relationship. I appreciate you taking the time to hear my story. I'm heading back to bed to cry for the rest of the day. Update 1. I appreciate everyone who took the time to give feedback and support. It truly assisted me in getting through the past few days. I received a lot of criticism and harsh names, and I accept that. I appreciate the feedback. Easter Sunday and today have been tough for me, two of the most difficult days I've experienced. I drove to my parents' house. When I got there, the first thing they asked was, "Where's James?" I said he had a work emergency and couldn't come. I mentioned this because I wanted to keep the family gathering peaceful. My family believed my story, but they started to get suspicious as the day went on, since I wasn't texting or calling my husband like I usually do. I sent some fake texts to distract them and pretended I got replies from him. I told everyone he was still at the office and would call me tomorrow. Honestly, he didn't reach out at all, not even to check if I got there okay. This really hurt me. I decided to spend the night at my parents' place and talk to them about our marriage issues on Monday. I was anxious about it because I knew they would criticize and dislike me. I told them this morning, and it went exactly as I expected. They shouted, insulted me, claimed they didn't raise me this way, and said a lot of other things. They brought my sister in, and she started to yell at me as well. I apologized and started to cry. I admitted that what I did was wrong, and I understand it now. I've learned from this and won't repeat the mistake again. I said my main goal right now is to regain the love and trust of James. In the end, even though they were really upset with me, they said they loved me and hoped our marriage could be saved. I drove home on Monday evening. I tried calling and texting James throughout the day, but he didn't respond. When I got home, there was a note on the counter. It said he had gone to Florida to see his parents and would be back on Sunday. I felt really bad. We were supposed to visit them in early May, and now that won't happen because of me. I dislike myself. That's all I have for now. I'm feeling really down and sad. What frightens me is that I'm not crying anymore. The pain and regret I have is so profound, tears don't help anymore. It's been almost a year since my last update, and I didn't intend to post again. However, there was a lot of interest from the community, so I chose to share more. I have some bad news and some good news. To start with the bad news, I am divorced. It was over in December. Ultimately, James chose to end our marriage after I was with someone else. He told me he could never trust me again and felt ashamed to be seen with me in public. He experienced divorce and regained his sense of masculinity. I don't agree. He never lost his masculinity, and only our families know about my brief connection with Jaden. But fine, whatever. Now for the good news, actually, the great news. James and I got back together last month. We reunited on Valentine's Day, and it's been great. We meet up when he decides, roughly once a week, but the intensity between us is much stronger now than it was when we started 7 years ago. He has made it clear that this is just a physical arrangement and that we will never be married, live together, or be a couple again. I'm fine with this. Not exactly, but I'll accept whatever comes my way. I want to win James back. If that doesn't happen, I want to have his kids. I want to be clear, I would never try to trap him into having kids. I just genuinely want to have children with him. I've figured out a way for us to share custody and make this work without getting married. I get that it might seem wild, but I really care about him and can't imagine having kids with anyone else. I understand that this could risk any chance of a relationship with another guy, but I only want James. I have nothing more to share for now. I might not post again unless something significant occurs, but I would really appreciate your thoughts on my situation. Do you think I'm out of my mind for dating James? Should I just move on and look